We're now going to talk about cQube, a solution that states can use to derive actionable insights out of various disparate education data sets they may have. While the session is going on, please type in your questions into the Q&A section so that we can answer it at the end of the session. I'm now joined by two of my colleagues. The first is Abhineet Singh, Business Lead for Analytics at EkStep Foundation. And the second colleague is Arvind Gopalakrishnan, Head of Delivery and Operations at TIBIL Computer Solutions. Over to Abhineet.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jay, for the introduction. So I'll just share my screen. Okay. So I want to begin by talking about the idea of what cQube does, right? So it's first of all, in the beginning, I want to talk about that, it's a Sunbird open source solution that is focused on providing actionable insight using state education data. And one of the key reasons of why we wanted to create this tool is that what we observe from our experience in the field is that a lot of data is captured by the school education system. And a lot of effort is being put to convert that data into a digital format. So, right, a lot of people will basically enter that information in their computers. But what we see is that despite collection of so much data and spending so much effort, the data is not available for timely analysis and insights. And sometimes it can take as long as 6 months for a data to be converted into a report. And then the other big frustration that we observe when we are visiting schools is that teachers and headmasters would tell us that, a lot of that data is not available to them. So even though they're capturing all this information, they don't really know what has been the output of all that entire effort. So they are pretty much lost around that. Now, there are a few reasons why that exists, and I think my colleague Arvind will basically talk in more detail about it. But one of the key reasons of why this issue exists is the way our current data system exists within the education sector. So the reason is that each of these data systems are collecting data, creating data, but they all exist in silos, and there is no quick way to basically connect each one of them. So each of them are existing in silos, and it's very difficult and it takes a lot of effort to connect these data sources to generate any analysis. For instance, if I want to connect student attendance with the performance of the student, it would take me a considerable amount of time before I can take that action. And by the time I would generate the analysis, it may be too outdated. And I think this is something that we all would value, especially during the COVID times when people were being tested and then it was taking a lot of time for the results to come. So we know from our experience now that, getting data to generate timely analysis is very, very critical. Now, the way we see cQube is basically as a tool which empowers the journey of from data to generating timely analysis and insight. And the fundamental idea that we see solving is it's creating the ability to, or distributing the ability to see, solve, and act. Now, I will invite my colleague Arvind to take us to more details about cQube and its core functionality of what it makes a very wonderful tool. So, Arvind, over to you.
Welcome to the session on product built on Sunbird, which is called cQube. Like Abhineet has said earlier, cQube is can be considered an analytics tool. But we can't bracket it as an analytics tool. It's a tool which provides actionable insights for the state education system at various admin levels. So this is a very powerful tool in that way. I'll just share my screen to start off on the presentation. Okay. So there are 4 tenets of cQube, or the 4 fundamental pillars of cQube. The first one is that it is an automated data ingestion engine from multiple siloed sources. This means it can take in data from multiple data sources and process it. That is part one. The second pillar is that it does the data processing on this data to create metrics and indices, which is customized and which is very, very useful for the state governments to, or the person who viewing it to see. The third and fourth are basically visualizations. cQube comes with certain built-in visualizations. These are not just visualizations; these are also primarily actionable, which we will see as we go along. And for those who want a little more out of the system, the data is also exposed in the form of APIs so that developers can connect to it, and the analysts can connect to it and create reports that they think would be meaningful and useful. So these are the four fundamental pillars. So we'll dive straight into a little bit of technical details about what cQube is like and what it's about. So cQube can be divided into three main, going from left to right, it can be divided into three main parts. The first is, like I was telling you, it can be the data ingestion is part one, where automatically data is ingested from multiple silos of data, either from the state education system or even Diksha. So these two are separate independent sources of data. They can be ingested using APIs and pushed into cQube. Now cQube will do the processing on the data. It will create the normalized matrices for the schools at various admin levels. And it will generate actionable insights either in the form of reports, wherein the administrator can view and act upon those information, or in the form of charts and maps, which again we shall see as we go along the presentation, and view how each metric is doing. So that is the third part on the right hand side. So these three make up cQube, and I shall go over each one as we go along. So this is the first part, the automatic data ingestion and the configurable data sources. Now, this configurable data sources is an important point, because there are some states which have certain data sources but do not have the other data sources which are there in cQube. So it is possible to configure the system to accept only certain data sources. So which gives any state adopting it the flexibility to use only the data that they have access to. So that is the configurable part of the data source. And the data ingestion that I've talked about, you can see the different data sources are things like student attendance, the teacher attendance, the TPD, as they say, the teacher professional development data. Then you have the school infrastructure data. You have the semester reports. You have the periodic assessment tests data. So all these data are sitting in multiple silos across the state government machinery, and they can be ingested by cQube and acted upon. And these visualizations that we will be talking about later will also, you can also create composite reports of them, which means you can take data from multiple silos, put them together to get you a composite view, which is powerful in its own way. So this is part two. This is the center of cQube. What is cQube basically doing? So once the data has been ingested and it comes into cQube, the data needs to be, data is validated. And this validation can be, it happens in multiple layers. For example, the data file itself, it looks whether the size of the file that is ingested is the same as the file that is existing. It looks for blank rows and data type mismatch. All that kind of data validation happens, and it is logged. So the administrator can actually go back to these logs to see what could have gone wrong, so that they can correct it and make the data, they can improve the quality of data. So that is the importance of the data validation and logging. The creation of normalized matrices I've already spoken about. So these matrices can be for a specific data source, or it can be a composite report that is being created. These normalized matrices, of course, are created in such a way that it gives you actionable insights. It creates exception lists and action lists, which is what an administrator is looking for. For example, it is possible that while looking at a certain report, you find that a certain region or a certain cluster is not performing as the rest of the clusters nearby. So you can, using this exception list, you can see what could have been the reason for it to have performed the way it has. And of course, you have the usage statistics based on what who has seen what report and how many reports. So that is the core functionality of cQube. And these are a few of the items which are available, like I was talking to you about the composite reports and the infrastructure data reports. So the third part, of course, is the visualization part itself. The visualization is it's beautiful, of course, but in addition to that, it's a powerful tool because it allows the user, using the necessary security, to log into the system through the internet, and it's a secure login, and they can actually view the data at various administrative levels. That means you can see the data at a district level, you can see it at a block level, you can see it at a cluster level, and you can even drill down to school level. So you have the access right from the district level or even the state level down to the school level. And it's a browser based. So what, in simple words, this is something that allows you to see and act, which means you can actually see the data on your screen, and because of the functionality of cQube, which gives you actionable insight, you can actually go out and act on it. So that is the native visualization which comes with cQube. In addition to that, of course, we have APIs which expose the data to slightly more advanced users who can create their own reports. Analysts, advanced analysts who can take this data and create their own insights into the existing data. So that is the part 4. And this is part of the data. Like you can see, this is the dashboard of the, or rather the dashboard that comes once you log in. It gives you the data. If you can see, it says it gives you the numbers in the dashboard itself. This is another kind of visualization, which is a scatter plot. You just at present, for example, you can have any x-axis and y-axis, and based on that, you can have a appropriate scatter plot. So x and y-axis can be changed to change the view of the scatter plot. This is the view of the map. So we've just taken a sample, some sample data. This is starting from the state level, zooming down to the district, block, cluster, and ultimately the school level. So, coming to the technology that is used in cQube, like Matthew said before me, and Madhu was also mentioning, Sunbird basically believes in it's basically an open source platform. So this entire software is available on Git. On the left, you can see the data sources, the multi-siloed data sources, which include student attendance, assessment data, teacher attendance, and this data is moves to what we call an emission bucket. Right now, this has been built on AWS, but with slight customization, it should work with any other cloud system. So the first bucket is the emission bucket, where the data comes and it sits the emission data. Apache NiFi is what we use as the central orchestration unit, which does all the orchestration and the movement of, it manages the data flow from the left to the right. And so once the data comes to the emission bucket, it picks up the data, moves it to the input bucket that you see on the top. And from the input bucket, it picks it up, moves it to PostgreSQL, the database, where queries are run to create your composite matrices, normalized matrices and indices. And they are like returned back in the form of JSON files to the output bucket. And we use the tools used could be Angular, could be Leaflet for maps, could be Chart.js for charts. All these read from the output bucket and create your reports. And the same output bucket is exposed using APIs for external tools like Metabase or Tableau for people to access the data and create their own reports outside cQube. So this is the platform overview. And this is a small flow of the data sources that I was explaining to you in the previous slide. So the data that comes and sits in the emission bucket, which is acted upon by NiFi. It picks up this data and moves it to the input bucket. In the input bucket, the validations are done, the logging is done. If there is any configuration, it takes care of it in the input bucket. And then it moves to the PostgreSQL. Once it moves to the database, the queries are run on PostgreSQL. And the transform data in the form of aggregate matrices and indices, the normalized ones, they transformed and stored into the output bucket in the form of JSON. And they are used by the tools, visualization tools, to create reports. And the same JSON files are exposed either in the form of the normalized data, the transform data, where anybody can plug in a third-party tool. We have checked with Metabase and Tableau. Or we also expose them the data directly through the PostgreSQL or the JSON files, or an advanced analyst to download the data and actually create their own analysis and provide insights on that. So that is the data flow. The kinds of users, we have four main kinds of users. The administrator. The administrator is a user who can create users, who can do the configuration of the system, start, stop services of the system. And the administrator can access this cQube system only using a VPN. So their access is highly secure. So is the rest of them, of course. The dashboard report viewer is the viewers who see the reports which are existing in cQube. The dashboard creator are the users who have access to the JSON files using APIs, and they can create their own reports. And the last one are advanced data analysts who have access to the raw data using APIs, and they can create their actionable insights. So this is kind of a health card that has been created, where you can see you have data on student attendance, semester performance, the UDICE data, PAT performance. So this data keeps, this is the health card which a person can look at, and they can drill down further to access the reports and get an idea of what's happening. This is the brief write-up of the security system, which I think Matthew has already spoken about in his earlier talk when he was talking about the security that usually goes in. So, like he said, anybody who comes in through the internet first hits the load balancer. From the load balancer, they move to the proxy, the Nginx proxy, through which they access the main web pages, which gives them access to the visualizations which are possible. The admin, on the other hand, goes through the VPN, gets authenticated, and has access through a certain port to the administrative functionalities of the system. That is that's what we've got for you today. Any questions? Abhineet, if you want to add something. Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, no, Arvind, I don't want to add anything. I think because of some technical difficulty, we have lost Jay. So I'll be the one who will be doing the Q&A. So if, okay, I can't share my video.
I'll stop sharing mine 1 second.
No, you can continue sharing a video, but just sharing a screen. Okay, so we have a few questions, Arvind. So I'll ask you, and then I think some of them even I can answer. So I think the very first one that we are hearing people asking is cQube a general analytics tool or a solution for the education matrix? So do you want to take it or you want me?
Yeah,
Actually, I can take this one.
Yeah,
so see, the idea of cQube is not, it's not an analytics tool. It is not going to be competing with the likes of Tableau or any other tool that's available in the market. The idea is that, within the education sector, we saw a lot of data being collected, a lot of data being in silos, and the time that it was taking the data to generate insight was a lot. And what we observed is that there is a certain process through which that data has to be taken. And what cQube is doing is it's basically automating a large part of that process. So it's kind of enabling the journey from data to insights very quickly, and it's also enabling export of the data that or the matrix that have been created, so that any power user who has access to Tableau or R or Python or any great data visualization tool can basically take that data and then do visualization on top of that. The second question, Arvind, I think it's a little tricky one. So someone is asking that, is there any way to monitor and analyze, validate how much of education ministry has assured during the election and how much of that has been fulfilled? So, okay, I'll answer this one. Definitely we want cQube as a way to improve the accountability in the education system, but politics is beyond this tool, so we can't really comment on that. This third one, Arvind, I'll ask you this question. So could you please mention one or more, what are the tools that are used for building the map and graph with such large database input?
Yeah, so the maps, like I mentioned, we use the technology called Leaflet, which can handle all the data that we are getting for a specific state. So Leaflet is the name, LEAF, LET, Leaflet is what we use for maps. What we are using for graphs are Chart.js. It's basically Angular JavaScript-based visualization. So Chart.js and Leaflet is basically two tools that we are using, and we found them extremely compatible with the large data sizes that we like working.
Sure. So, Arvind, as a follow-up, I just wanted to ask a question. Is there a reason why we have used these tools and not others? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's like we did try some other open source tools for the maps, and we found them, they were extremely slow. As in like for a data of let's say there are 50,000 schools in a typical state. So 50,000 to 40 to 50,000 schools. To display data across the map, it was taking us nearly 10 to 15 minutes to render it on the screen. So whereas Leaflet takes about 2 seconds. So the amount of time saved there was huge. I mean, like there's no comparison, which is why and they come with very, I mean, like there are other tools, there are paid tools as well, but given that the open source gives you the best of best, so Leaflet seemed to be the way to go.
So it's like even if someone wants to adopt it, they are using an open source tool, so they don't have to pay any money for it. And as you mentioned, it's a lot faster than what earlier we were using. So it is actually like really quick. Okay. Now, the other question I wanted to ask, which is on the Q&A chat box, is can I have a custom data source example, XPI statements?
Yeah, I mean, like there are documentation, like I was mentioning, it's all on Git. All they have to do is go to the Sunbird page on cQube, and there will be documentation for the APIs which they can use. So the cQube can be installed. We encourage people to like try it out. It's available on Git. You just have to like get a copy of it based on the hardware spec that we have mentioned in that. Install it, and you're ready to go.
Okay. There is one question which is cQube integrated into Diksha?
It's the other way around. Diksha is separate. It's a separate data source on its own, the separate platform on its own. And we are ingesting some part of Diksha data, yes. So, but Diksha is separate, cQube is separate, as in like the reason why Diksha has been built is for a different reason, and cQube is something totally different.
Okay. Yeah. Before I ask the next question, I want to highlight a point that cQube is currently live in Gujarat. So what we saw on the presentation were some of the data sources that were there in Gujarat, which is semester and student attendance and school information, etc. Now the other question, Arvind, is that let's say if a state does not have all these data sources, can they still install cQube and use it? And if they do that, then what happens?
Yeah. In part of my presentation, I did mention this point. It is configurable, which means we have built cQube for, let's say, 7 or 8 data sources. If a certain state has got only one data source, let's say they've only got Diksha. So it can be configured to only ingest Diksha data and not the rest. So everything would work as it is. So Diksha reports would work as it is. That is, the data would be ingested, the matrices would be calculated, the visualizations would come. You would have the data available in your buckets for an analyst to analyze. The rest of the data, because it does not exist, it would not be there. And that is the only, what is there will work, what is not there will obviously not work. That's all.
Okay. The other thing you mentioned is that cQube enables the ingestion of data as and when it's ready. So let's say there is a data which is there updating every day, but then there are some data sources which only get updated, let's say weekly or bi-weekly or monthly. So can that also be configured, or like how does that happen?
Yes, that's also part of the configuration. You can actually set the times of day that each job needs to run. So let's say student attendance comes every day at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, something like that. So you can while setting up the system, you can configure the system to ingest data every day at 5 o'clock or every day at 6 o'clock.
And
only student elements. And semester data, it comes once a semester. So you could say once in 6 months, do it. So that flexibility is there.
so Arvind, just for audience and their perspective, let's say we take an example of Gujarat, which has roughly 35,000 government schools, and we're talking about some 36 lakh students, roughly. How much time does cQube, for instance, take to process the student attendance data and generating the visualization, having the APIs ready so that any power user can take the data for their own analysis or updation of the visualization that are on cQube? So how much, just to give a perspective of how much time does cQube take, can you give us an idea of what is the timeline like?
See, it depends on the size, like the size that you had mentioned. I would say it would take anything between 5 minutes to 15 minutes, kind of a timeline for it to start from ingestion to creation of those matrices and storing into the buckets. So it would take that much time. So for it to.
But can you give a ballpark figure of how much time does it take?
Let's go with 15 minutes.
Okay, so that's like that quick. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, there are a few more questions, Arvind, which I wanted to ask you. Is that you mentioned that like cQube is currently live in Gujarat. So from your perspective, what have been some of your learnings while working with the state, especially on the technical aspect, like getting something installed? What are some of the challenges that you have faced?
As such, there weren't any major challenges. The only thing that I can think of is it requires a certain infrastructure. So to get that infrastructure, we need to let people know well in advance that this is the infrastructure required, and that has to be ready for your setup by the time you begin your setup. That is one part. Second part is obviously the data itself. So you need access to the data in at least the kind of format you require it in.
Okay. And the other last question which I had on this one is, can cQube only be used by states, or let's say an NGO that is running a massive program which is currently, let's say, operational in multiple countries, can they also use cQube for?
Oh yes. The possibilities are endless. We built a platform. It's on how Sunbird is. It's a platform on which you can build the education system. People have customized it to not only handle education but other fields as well. So cQube similarly, it can be extended, customized to handle other industries, not just the education sector. Other NGOs can take it up, but of course it has to be customized a little bit. But the 4 pillars that I talked about, fundamental pillars, stay the same. Your ingestion, your creation of matrices, visualizations which is built in, and your custom visualizations. Those will not change. You just have to customize it.
Okay, there's one more question that has come, which is the startup Santana is humble startup endeavor. So curious to know, like, what are the tools that you have to pay for in order for you to install it, cQube? So can you talk about like that if you want to install cQube and start using it, what are the tools that you need to pay for? I mean,
you will need to. It depends. See, you'll need to host it somewhere. So if you've got your own hosting center with your own cloud provider, you're like good. But if you need to go to a third-party provider, the third-party provider can be. It could be an in-house setup. It could be, let's say, Google. It could be Azure. It could be AWS. You will have to pay for that infrastructure. So that cost is there. Other than that cost, there is no other cost.
Okay.
Everything else is just open source and available. The code is lying in Git. You just have to download that, set it up, and you're ready to go with the existing visualizations that cQube is. Yeah.
So Arvind, just one question which I had was that, I'm a policy person, and for me, when I ventured into data, one of the biggest challenges was, installing Python and R. Now, the challenge is that, you have to go through a lot of processes to kind of do that. Is cQube also that cumbersome, or is it like you can install it very quickly? Or how does that work?
See, one of our first briefs that we had from Pramod Verma, so his brief was that you show me that you can install it using a single click.
Okay.
So cQube is something that you just have to download the code, single click, and the entire thing is downloaded. It downloads your Python stacks, it downloads your database, and installs. It does everything on its own. So I can't think of anything easier.
Okay. And I think we talked about the login-based users. So can you, for instance, like let's say if we take a case of a state like UP, which has over a lakh of schools, like a lot of teachers, right? Like it's like a country itself. Think about it. Is cQube capable of providing login-based access usage to each and every one of the teachers? Can that be done using cQube?
Teachers, yes.
Okay. So it has the capability of providing access to
multiple users. See, there's a lot of difference between giving capability to teachers to log in and concurrent logins.
Okay.
So the concurrency is possible. You will just the only catch would be obviously the sizing of your hardware. There's nothing else. Okay. But there is no limit. So it can be scaled up based on your infrastructure and your.
Okay. For the listeners, I also want to highlight one important point that the way cQube is designed, and I think from previous sessions that you must have heard, we also captured telemetry of its usage. So we also know that if we have asked teachers to view a report, whether they've done that or not is something cQube is also capable of collecting. So Arvind, can you talk a little bit about what kind of information can be captured and how it really enables action?
Yeah, I mean, like the kind of information that we call it, that everybody calls it telemetry. So what is captured is if you take the point of a web page, the person who's logging in, you get to know who has logged in, what links they have clicked on, how much time they've spent on each page, how they've navigated from place to place, screen to screen. So using that, you can actually come and generalize not to a huge extent, but to a certain extent to try and understand the behavior of a normal user who logs into the system.
It's like if I've asked a set of administrators in my state to view a report, I can actually validate whether they've logged in and they've seen that report or not. Right. So I can also see how much time they spent or not, because otherwise, like sending reports through emails and all, you don't really know whether they're consuming it.
Correct.